So the only thing remaining to me is to introduce Michael. Michael Green is the co-founder of Luna9, which is a Bristol-based design agency helping people to explain their big ideas in creative and engaging ways. Really delighted to be able to welcome him as a partner in JGI to give this talk, which is on increasing engagement with data. So over to you, Michael.
Thanks very much, Kate. Lovely to have you all here. It's great to see so many people. Just a little bit of housekeeping from me as well before we get going. As Kate said, we are recording, so hopefully that's all right with everyone. You'll see that you're all on mute. That's just to keep any kind of background noise out of the way, but rest assured, if you've got any questions, please do put them in the chat, and hopefully people can come off mute at the end and we can answer some questions. But do engage with the chat and share any kind of thoughts or links or ideas that you've got, because it's a great community that we've got here, and it'd be lovely to kind of see some of those ideas bouncing around. So without further ado, I will crack on. So I'm Michael, I'm from Luna9. We're a Bristol-based agency, as Kate said. We started a couple of years ago, and we work with organisations to really help them communicate what they're trying to say. A lot of the stuff that we do is with complex information, where often the people that know about it know a lot, but those that maybe don't have that insight, we've got to bridge the gap and make sure that that important information lands. Some of the people that we've done that with are academics, researchers. We've worked with people at Harvard, at Cambridge, with the Gene Golding Institute, which is very exciting for us being here in Bristol. Tech startups, all the way up to the guys that you've seen on the screen, World Health Organization, Dyson, NHS. It doesn't matter what level you're at, we're all kind of tackling the same kind of issues when it comes to communication, which I'll come to in a bit. But it's very interesting to see the parallels that you get from working with either a researcher or an academic or a tech startup that are literally just starting out, and the World Health Organization. You know, those themes run throughout, and we're going to have a look at some of those now. So this is what my talk is basically going to be centered around today. The idea that data is only useful if you can explain what it means. Why is that? Well, we're all used to explaining things. It's what I'm doing now. The problem is that we often get in our own way, swamping people with detail or expecting them to have the same level of understanding that we do. And unless you're communicating in a way that your audience can understand, it's just not really very interesting. And that's quite a hard thing to get our heads around sometimes when we're really buried in what it is that we're talking about. So we've got a choice. We can either carry on adding to the noise, or we can find a way to cut through it, to communicate in a way that really lands. So the goal here is to make sure that what you're saying has the best possible chance of engaging with whoever it is that you've identified that you're talking to. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the curse of knowledge. And this is hopefully a bit of an interactive start to the talk. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little poll. Hopefully you can all hear me all right. We've done a bit of rehearsing on this in the lead up to this talk. I'm going to do a bit of an experiment. I'm going to do some tapping on my table here, like this. And what I want you to do is listen to my tapping and see if you can work out what it is that I'm trying to communicate to you. Okay, so listen carefully. Okay, I'm going to do that once more because I know it's a strange thing that we're doing here. So I'll just do that once more. Okay, now without putting it in the chat, for those of you that have worked out what it is that I'm communicating, what I'm going to do is launch a poll. And so you should see a poll pop up in front of you now. What I want you to do is put in that poll whether it was that you understood what it was that I was communicating with you via taps. Okay, we're getting them coming in, they're flying in. Just give you another 15 seconds. So this is really interesting. I will get to why it's interesting in a moment as I just wait for the last few people to come in. This is the bit I'm always terrified with when it comes to doing a talk, because I always think everyone is going to know what I'm on about. And of course, what happens, this happens. The majority don't know what I'm talking about. Some people think it sounds familiar, and there's a couple that think they know, but they can't be sure. No one can say that they're 100% sure on what it is that I'm saying. So let's look into that a bit. Let me get rid of that. Okay, this curse of knowledge comes from a study that was done in 1990 at Stanford by someone called Elizabeth Newton. And basically the experiment that she ran worked with tappers and listeners. The tappers were asked to tap a series of songs, and the listeners had to try and work out what they were. Now, before that happened, these were songs like Happy Birthday and the national anthem, you know, things that you would expect people to know. So before they did this, they asked the tappers to say, well, out of the however many were doing, how many do you think the listeners will get? The tappers said, reckon it's going to be about 50-50, 1 in 2. Okay, so they did the experiment. How many do you think actually guessed the songs? It was 1 in 40, a 2.5% success rate. Now, they got their message across 1 time in 40 when they thought they'd get it across 1 time in 2. And why is that? We've got to explore why it is that we so drastically overestimate our ability to explain things. But the best way that I can describe this that makes people really kind of go back to a specific moment in their lives is when we play charades. You stand at the front, you know exactly what you're trying to communicate. It makes perfect sense to you, yet you get blank faces looking back at you. Now, what it was that I was actually tapping was Hey Jude by the Beatles. Now I'm going to tap it again, and what I want you to do is to listen again with the context I've told you this is Hey Jude. Okay, so you ready for this? So I could do another poll to see who now recognizes that as Hey Jude, but the numbers would be drastically higher, that people now understand what it is that I'm tapping. Now, why is that? Obviously, I told you what it was, which helps. But if I told you that, I don't know, if I told you the beats per minute or the fact that it's a song in the key of F major, does that help you? Probably not. But if I told you that it was a song by a 50s and 60s 4-piece British band from Liverpool who were a musical phenomenon, it's a 7-minute song, and it involves a guy playing a piano with a crowd chanting along. If I said that to you before and then said I'm going to tap something, I think the numbers would be skewed a lot higher. Now, why is that? That's because I'm giving you the context to understand the data that I'm giving you. So rather than it being that I'm looking at it from one point of view and the audience is looking at it from a multitude of different views, everyone is now in the same kind of context. I'm giving you the framework for you to understand what it is that I'm trying to communicate. So it's not just about giving more information, it's about giving the right information so that people can contextualize it in their brain. Everyone needs a frame of reference. Oh, I went too far. So what we're doing here is we're turning indistinguishable taps into a melody because you understand how you're supposed to be processing those taps. So why is it called a curse? Well, look at it this way. If we got another group of people and brought them onto this call now, and I did the experiment again, and I went, all of you are now hearing Hey Jude, whereas all the new people just hear taps. Now you can't unhear Hey Jude, it's just in your head now. In the same way that if I said to you, I'm going to tap Happy Birthday, but don't tell everyone else, and then I tapped it, you can't just hear taps, you hear Happy Birthday. Now, how does this relate to what it is that we're talking about today? Well, if we're communicating something, whether it's data, whether it's information, whether it's an idea, a theory, it's very difficult to put yourself in the shoes of someone that doesn't have the same level of knowledge and understanding that you do. To take away that frame of reference that you've got. And what we all fall into, I fall into this, and I do this for a living. You fall into the trap of underestimating how much you need to explain something to someone who doesn't have that same frame of reference as you do. So this is a real problem. Like I say, it stems right from school age up to people, dealing with some of the biggest problems that we've got in the world today. Everyone is affected by this curse of knowledge. So how do we combat it? The first thing to consider, we've got 2 things. One is, who are you talking to? The second one is, what is it that you want them to take away? Now, these 2 questions should underpin whatever it is that you're communicating. whenever you are looking to communicate something, this is the start point. This is the point where you should think, right, before I launch into typing or speaking or whatever, who am I talking to and what is it that I want them to take away? So let's look at the first one. Who am I talking to? At Luna9, we see it this way, that you can either be talking to a general audience, which is where you don't know who it is you're talking to. This talk is a good example where if I had a list of everyone that was coming, what their background was, what their kind of job role was, it's much easier for me to take it from a general audience to a targeted audience because I can start profiling who it is I'm talking to. But if it's a general audience, you've got to speak in a broader way. If it's a more targeted audience, you can afford to use more technical language. You can go into further detail. A lot of this seems obvious, I know, but you'll feel like that a lot through this talk. A lot of this stuff is very obvious, but we just tend to get in our own ways when we're actually putting it into practice. So let's look at the general audience first. There's a case study here. We've got the NHS website. The NHS digital team redid their website a couple of years ago in an effort to improve the accessibility for people. The enormous range, if you think of people that would access the NHS website, we've got an enormous range of backgrounds, ages, languages, all sorts. And so what they did was they took the reading age of any content that they put on there that was aimed at the public to 8 years old. And this is the interesting one. For professionals, so people working within the healthcare system, that reading age went up to just 12. Now, the reason this is interesting is because I think too often people get concerned that if they simplify things, it's patronizing, we're dumbing it down. When actually in our line of work, we find that far more often people, by not doing that, create it being too complicated. It becomes a barrier to entry rather than people feeling like, well, this is too obvious. And what we need to do is err on the side of simplicity so that if people want more information, they can get it, but we're not putting up that barrier and saying, if you don't have the same level of understanding as me, sorry, you can't really access this information. So what about the targeted group? Well, if you know who you're talking to, it becomes much easier to focus your message and focus your communication. So let's look at the BBC radio stations, for example. You've got 6 stations here, all with a very distinct profile of their audience and their demographic and their tastes. So the thing that they have in common is that they will all play music, they'll all share the news, they'll all share the weather. But the way that they put across that information via radio is drastically different on Radio 1 to how it is on Radio 4. And you can't take the way things are presented on Radio 4 and put it to a Radio 1 audience and expect them to have the same level of engagement. It just doesn't work like that. So what they do here is they speak in a way, I mean, obviously this is not a visual medium, but they communicate in a way that is suited to the audience that they're talking to, rather than just saying, well, I'm going to say what I need to say and hopefully it will land. So what is it that you want to achieve when you're talking to people? This is a stark fact that we always say to people, that you can't assume that people care as much as you do. I would love to think that when I write a blog or when I give a talk, I'm sure you all care just as much as I do. But if you're communicating something, we naturally assume that because it's interesting to me, it must be interesting to you. And it just doesn't work like that. Often you have to bring people in. You have to tease them into what you're trying to say so that they want to find out more. If you give someone a 20-page Word document that you're really passionate about, they might have a multitude of things going on in their life that means that they just can't dedicate the same amount of time to it that you can. That might be because they don't want to, it might be because they can't, it might be because they don't understand it. Either way, those are barriers which stop people engaging with your information. So let's look at this example. Let's say we got 3 people here, each with a very different set of circumstances, but let's just base it on time for now. We could go into knowledge levels or backgrounds or whatever, but let's just base this on time. So let's say that Judith here has all the time in the world, got plenty of time to read through stuff, but Samara over here is a busy doctor. She's got 2 minutes because she's got to go and do something else. The way that you present something to them needs to be different if you want them to take away what it is you want to take away. So again, if you gave them a 20-page document, the person that's got hardly any time is probably going to read the first paragraph and the last paragraph and look at any pictures. The person that's got 5 minutes will probably read the first page and then skim through the rest, picking out bits that kind of take their fancy. And the person that's got more time might indulge more, read everything. That's okay, but if you've got something really important on page 8 of your 20-page document, you're going to miss a huge amount of your audience that just don't have the time to go in and then find it. And that's, like I say, that's without considering their knowledge levels, how much they actually care in the first place. So assuming that everyone is going to dedicate as much time to reading this thing as you have to crafting it is a dangerous place to go. So at Luna9, we've kind of come up with this idea that we call a hierarchy of knowledge. Sorry, hierarchy of information. So a hierarchy of information is where you're communicating the same thing, but in just greater detail, and we can put it into layers. So I'll show you an example of this in a minute, but let's just take this as a really simple example. So for an audience that have either a basic understanding or no time, if I want to get across the fact that this is an equilateral triangle, here you go. Here's an image and here's a statement. That's all you need to know. You've learned what it is that I want to tell you, boom. For someone that's got a bit more time, I can put in more information. So I've still got the same information at the start. The shape is an equilateral triangle, but I'm adding in more detail because these are the people that either want to find out more or have the time to find out more. Then the third level, we can go even further and we can start giving far more detailed descriptions of this, but still all we're doing is giving people the option of going through the first level, then the second level, then the third level. Now, a lot of the time at Luna9, we do this with interactive documents. So here's an example of one that we did for the NHS. This is the GP contract that was released last year, 108-page written document, all words, and GPs have 8-minute windows in a day when they have to digest information. So getting an 8-page document is just, 108-page document just isn't going to work. So what we did was we took it to being an interactive guide where instead of having to read from page 1 to page 108 to find the information they need, we broke it down into a hierarchy where you could click onto chapters and look at workforce, for instance, and then find out what's happening in the timeline over the next 3 years. Now, this didn't replace the original document, but what it does is it gives people an access point, a way into this information on their terms, rather than saying, here is everything I want you to read, start at the beginning, read at the end, and assuming that they will have read it. Because we did some research after this, and the original contract, the research that we did showed about a 2% amount of people that actually read that document. Whereas this, we had 1,000 GPs reading it, and we could look at all the analytics and really drill down into where people were looking, where they spent time, where they left. Now, I accept that not everyone can do an interactive document like this, but if you think about a written document, if you were, say, publishing a paper or something like that, the theory still remains the same. If you gave it to someone who had half an hour, would they take away the same thing that someone with 5 minutes would take away? Probably not. But can you guarantee that the person you're giving it to will dedicate half an hour to it? Or do you need to start structuring the way you communicate to make sure that for the people that read the start, they understand what they're going to read. They see the steps, they can almost see an overview of it that will draw them in and encourage them to read more, rather than just going, bosh, throwing it all at the wall and really hoping it sticks. It's getting rid of these assumptions that is so crucial. It's not about what you want to tell them, it's about what you want them to take away. I might have loads and loads that I want to tell you, but actually I have to be mindful about what it is that the circumstances that you will digest this information, so that I can make sure that you really take away from it what it is that I want you to take away. So let's look at some practical steps to things that you can do that actually might improve your communication. Here's a guy we all recognize very well. A pie chart is something that we've grown up with. You use it at school and throughout our lives. It is probably one of the most commonly used ways of data visualization going. And I mean, I've put these advantages and disadvantages in. You know this. You know why it's good. It's easy. It's very simple to understand. It's good for comparing increments within a whole. Great. But what about the disadvantages of it? Well, you can't compare two data sets, but that's a separate issue. I'm more concerned about the fact that this is a very well-trodden way of conveying data. I've seen this all my life. When I see a pie chart, I don't think, oh, this is interesting, I should find out more. I think it's a pie chart. I think it's the budget option. It's the lowest shelf of how can I show this data? Well, it's out of 100%, so I'll show a pie chart. Now, sometimes a pie chart is all you need. And that's, if we're talking about keeping things simple, you go for it with a pie chart. But what this section is about is exploring some different avenues to make sure that people feel engaged with your data, like they want to investigate and find out more, rather than just offering up the easiest way for you to create it and for people to read it, and assuming that because it's easy, people like it. So here are 6 other examples of ways of comparing within a whole. Now, I should caveat this by saying that not all of these can replace a pie chart. They perform different roles. But what they all do is show increments within a whole. So we've got a tree map here. We quite like these. You can make these in Excel. A stacked bar chart, which is really good for showing increments against another value. Starting to get a bit more playful with things like pictorial fraction charts and area charts. These are essentially doing exactly the same thing as a pie chart. But if you're looking down and you see a relevant image that's showing that data rather than the pie chart, even if you've got other pie charts in your work, it just breaks it up. It makes it more visually exciting. And essentially it's doing the same thing, but you're asking the reader to engage in what it is you're talking about. Looking at the different sizes of elephants is far more interesting than looking at a round pie chart when I've seen 10 pie charts before, when I've read previous pages. Sankey diagrams and alluvial diagrams are more about how to split things out and where they potentially end up. So they perform a different function. But there are times and places where these can be really valuable. Now, what we need to bear in mind here is finding the balance between form and function. So what I'm not advocating you do is go and just use the wildest charts you can find, because we all know that's not going to work. It's going to confuse things. And if there's one thing I don't want you to do, it's to confuse things. But what you've got to do is find the balance between something that looks engaging and that really sells the story that you're trying to tell. So rather than just presenting information, you're presenting a story for people to buy into. That balances that with the functionality of, you need to get this data across, it needs to be clean, it needs to be concise, and it needs to fit with the overall arc of what it is you're trying to say. Finding that balance is crucial. And too often when I see researchers, academics, students especially, but especially in the kind of tech world and science, there's far too much function and not enough form. And so it's about finding that balance and just maybe pushing yourself a bit. There are plenty of data viz options out there, and just exploring some of those options is fun, and you can start seeing things in a new light by exploring different ways of communicating the same data set. So what tools have you got at your fingertips to do this? The obvious one's Microsoft Office. I mean, there are other software packages available, but we can all put together a spreadsheet in Microsoft Office. You can turn it into infographics and data viz. That's great. It's basic, and it has its limitations, but it's a great starting point. Often what we do at Luna9 is we start off by just putting data into a spreadsheet and spitting out a pie chart. So we start seeing, well, if we show it as a pie chart, how does it look? If we show it as a bar chart, how does it look? And then we can take that idea and we can expand it into a more exciting and engaging way of presenting the data, but we know that it's still rooted from that original point. So we're not just doing creativity for the sake of it, but it's rooted in the data. The next option is data visualization software, which I know a lot of you will be very familiar with, things like Tableau and the like. There's a huge amount of these out there. They range in complexity and price, but they're really good ways of plugging in your data and having a suite almost of data visualization options at your fingertips. You don't need to be a creative person because all of that's encoded into the software, which is fantastic. They do have their limitations in terms of creativity, but I'm always seeing people that really push the boundaries of things like Tableau, and it's exciting to see how people are combining the form with the function. If you move into the more kind of creative space, you've got things like online design software, things like Canva and Snapper and things like that. Now, I'd say that these are moving away from data visualization, maybe more towards infographics. Infographics are a great way of visual storytelling. So taking loads of words on a page and telling that story succinctly. I mean, imagine doing a paper or an article, and at the start, you've just got the infographic, which is almost the 30-second overview. So for those of you, for the audience that maybe are thinking, well, I'm just going to glance at it, if they find that a visually enjoyable journey, they'll read the rest. That's the way our brain works. We get drawn in. Now, online design software, I'm a creative person. I find that quite intuitive. I'm sure a lot of the tools that you guys use, I would find absolutely the opposite. So that's something that I would advise caution over. And that's where the next one comes in, information designers. Now, I know I'm biased because I'm one of them, but the reason I think information designers have an important role to play with with data analysts and people exploring data is that generally, and this is a generalization, generally in my experience, we tend to see the world in slightly different ways. When you're working with people that are very analytical, when you're working with people that are creative, those two viewpoints can come up with some really exciting, different ways of communicating information. So working with information designers, not only to make your data visualization look amazing, but also to look at the storytelling element, the way that you're shaping it. I hope that some of the things I'm mentioning here might be a slightly different way to how you would ordinarily approach a problem. And I'm sure I would have a lot to learn from you guys and vice versa. So it's well worth engaging with information designers, whether you spend lots of money on it or not. Just getting these people in your network, talking to people, getting them in the community, I think is a really powerful way of improving the way that you're communicating. Just to finish this section, I think this quote is something that we really live by. Perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. That idea that just adding more stuff isn't the answer. We want less, but better. If you can tell the same story, get across the same information in 10 pages that you can in 20, then you really have to question the value of those extra 10 pages. Now, it may be that you just get rid of them, or maybe it's just a way of structuring your communication in a way like I was talking about with the hierarchy of information, where you give people what they need at the start, but then you offer up more of what they might want after all, but you're not creating that barrier. So let's look briefly at the importance of getting it right. I want to explore the power of visual communication, because a lot of stuff gets banded around about, I read it all the time online, about how we can process images 60,000 times faster than we can process text. Most of it is unsubstantiated, and I'm in the business of basing kind of my knowledge off the data available. So what I've got here is a few points, and I'm going to back them up with hopefully some research that shows that what we're talking about really does have a lot of merit. So communicating more visually, whether it's infographics or data visualization, is more memorable. I'll touch on that a bit more in a bit, but it breaks that monotony of just lots of text, and it keeps you engaged and helps people retain important information. You get better engagement. We've seen that with social media, which I know is a long way from the area that a lot of you probably work in, but the trends are interesting. That content that's got more imagery has far, far more interaction. And so if you can get more visual communication into the way that you're putting across these complex ideas, you're going to get people to buy into it, get that better engagement. And lastly, a change of mindset. And that's a change of mindset for you guys, because if you start looking at how can I display this information, whether it's written or data or whatever, if you start considering these things at the outset, before you end up with a 3,000 word copy deck that you need to communicate, that change of mindset can be really interesting to get you to start exploring other avenues. And this isn't just a change of mindset individually. I see it across science and technology, especially academia. There's real standards of the way people communicate. And I know a lot of that is driven by journals and you have to submit things in certain ways. But I think pushing the boundaries of the way we communicate, that's the way you get more people engaged. And it takes one person to do it and for it to be a success, for other people to start going, actually, I really like that. And when you're reading through papers or you're reading through lots of articles, it's going to be the one that is more engaging, more memorable, that is going to be the one that sticks out. So let's look at some research behind it. Attention spans are narrowing. This has been something that anecdotally is said loads over the last few years, especially since the birth of social media. But last year, a study from the Technical University of Denmark showed that attention spans are narrowing. Essentially, this study that was published in Nature, and I'll be happy to put the details of it in the chat afterwards. What it says is that because there is so much more information now, it's not that we're less interested, it's just that the peak at which we can absorb it is much shorter. So we get into it far faster, but we come out of it far faster as well. And this study was based on books over the last 100 years, movies over the last 40 years, Google, web searches, all sorts of different media. And it pointed to the fact that this desire for newness, for something else, means that people are willing to invest less time in one particular thing, which increases the importance of getting people to buy into what you're talking about early on, because unfortunately, you could have written the best paper in the world, but if someone's got something else to do, or a crying baby, or you know, the pot's boiling over, unless you've caught them in those early stages, they're probably going to be distracted by something else. So it's about getting people to buy into your story and taking them through it step by step, rather than just going, splat, here is all my information. Next one, interpreting visuals versus reading. So there's this fascinating company called Spritz, some of you may have heard of. What they've done is they've invented some software that plugs into your phone, so it's an app, and it positions the words on the screen in the same place, moving them only sideways to put the key letter of each word in exactly the same place. They did research that suggested that 80% of readers' time reading a page was spent moving your eyes around, with only 20% actually digesting the words. So by stopping the eye having to move around, these words just cycle through, and you can end up with reading speeds of 3, 4, even 5 times the normal reading speed, because the eye isn't having to move around. I mean, we've all seen examples of it in advertising. There was a very famous Honda ad a few years ago where the words come on incredibly fast. They're flickering away and you think, there's no way I'm going to be able to read this. Yet somehow the brain is able to process them at an incredible rate. Now, the reason this is relevant is because the way that we interpret text is very different to the way that we interpret visuals. Visuals we've had for our entire since we've had the ability to see, basically, we've been interpreting visuals. But text and reading is something that's only really come about in the last few thousand years. And the way that we process words into sentences, sentences into paragraph, requires different processes in the brain. That's fine. We're never going to replace text. I'm not saying ditch all your writing and let's just all draw pictures. What I'm saying is that we need to find a balance between just communicating in text and very heavy graphs, and give people a chance to have that visual break, to allow their brain to recharge almost, so that they can engage with what you're saying in a more effective way. There's a TED talk by this guy, Frank Wardman, he's the CEO of Spritz, where he talks about developing it, and he does some demos, and they've got the research with videos of eyes. I'd recommend you watch it. It's a good watch. Lastly, memory retention. Again, lots of anecdotal evidence about memory retention and visuals, but there was a study done in 1969 by a guy called Edgar Dale, who looked at memory retention of various ways of absorbing content after set time periods. And he found that after 3 days, it was the visual content that really stayed with people, with the written content far, far less. Now, again, this isn't a case of saying ditch all the written content, but it's about finding that balance. All of this is a balance. But if we lean towards the heavy, complex, data-driven side, there's always a danger that people aren't going to retain it or aren't going to engage with it. A look at the pros and cons. So we all know the benefits of data communication. We can make sense of complex ideas. There's the ability to educate, inspire, share knowledge. And now we have a generation of people that have grown up with data. So it's not just smartwatches, it's, you know, I track my energy usage on an app where I look at the data available. The idea of doing that years ago was light years away, but now it's just part of my life. And data is becoming interwoven into the fabric of society, which is fascinating and presents some amazing opportunities for communicating and for sharing knowledge. But there are dangers as well. The power to manipulate, confuse, and misinform, danger of being repurposed without the original context, and complicating over clarifying. And I think all three of these could be leveled at things that have happened in the last few months with COVID-19, that taking data sets out of context and using them to inform a narrative or policy, or taking a graph without the context of what comes with it and sharing it, which happens a huge amount on social media. Losing the context is such a dangerous thing. So we have a responsibility as the people sharing that information to make sure that it's shared in a way that is accessible and really kind of ethically driven, that the data is driving the story rather than the story driving the data, because that's when we get ourselves into trouble. So I'm going to wrap it up here by sharing some resources that I've come across. The DataViz project is a fantastic resource. It's a Danish company, a lot like Luna9 actually, who deal with DataViz, and they've got this library of all the different types of data visualization. So that page that I did with the 6 types, loads and loads of them. And it's just really good, and it's a playful way of just going exploring what's out there. You might have in your head 12 different ways of sharing data. Well, try having 50 and see whether you might find a couple that actually, next time you're sharing data, you might think, well, actually, that's a more engaging and more appropriate way of sharing this data. Bristol Media is a great resource for creatives around Bristol. So if you're looking to expand your network to maybe touch base with people like myself or other freelancers or anyone that's working in the creative industries that you think could add value either to your work or just to a conversation, Bristol Media is a great resource for people in our community. And I found it a great place just to expand my network and to meet other people. More or Less is a fantastic podcast, which I listen to, which a lot of you may well be aware of, but they take data that's been in the news and they look at the story that's around it versus the data itself and whether the two marry up. What I was saying with the last slide about the pros and cons of data sharing, a lot of this is covered in More or Less. It's very interesting to see topical examples of this in action. It just makes you more aware of the implications of how you present data. And then Made to Stick is a great book that I've read that admittedly has a bit of an advertising lean to it, but it's all about creating ideas that really land with people. So it talks about the curse of knowledge in there. It's a really good read or listen. I prefer to listen to audiobooks. It's very interesting just to give you some other ideas about different ways to connect with people, to really make them see what it is that you're trying to communicate. So let's summarize. I talked about the curse of knowledge, what it is, how to avoid falling into it when you communicate. It's really important to be aware of it because as soon as you're aware of it, you can start calling yourself on it. And the best way to test yourself is to share your ideas, to share your work, talk to other people about it in your own network in terms of people you work with, but they might be under the same curse of knowledge as well. So see if you can talk to, I don't know, someone in your family or one of your friends about what it is you're doing can you do it in 20 seconds? Can you do it in 1 minute? If you can start communicating what it is that you want to say in those short bursts, you can build it up from there, making sure that the clarity really stays throughout. Who are you talking to? We covered that in terms of identifying your audience. This is crucial for before you start communicating to really consider who it is that you're talking to so you can pitch at the right level. What you want to achieve, the main takeaway from this is that it's not about what you want to tell them. This isn't a self-indulgent, ego-driven thing. It's about what it is that you want them to take away. What are you communicating that you want them to go, I've learned something here? Because sometimes it takes some editing and some time away from what you're doing to come back and really look at it from someone else's point of view. Steps to improve your communication. We covered a lot of those. I'm very happy to talk about more of those in the questions about ways that you can use the tools at your disposal to really help improve what it is that you're trying to say. And of course, the importance of getting it right, the ethics, the potential, all of the things that surround communication, which we're all aware of, but we need to be conscious of that that's our responsibility as people sharing data. That's really important. And it's up to us to make sure that we're communicating in the right way that really puts across the message as it should be put across. I'm keen to connect with as many of you as possible. I love hearing from people about the challenges that they're facing, especially from different sectors to me, just because it really helps inform the way I tackle problems. I'm going to put my LinkedIn, whatever you call it, profile name thing in the chat. So feel free to connect with me and ask me any questions that you've got. Not just in a kind of come and work with Luna9 way, but just in a way of expanding our network. The more people in Bristol and the surrounding area can touch base and learn from each other, the more we can start, integrating what we do. And I find that a fascinating prospect that rather than working in these little silos, we can start crossing over and improving the way we're communicating. So that's my talk. And what I'll do now is stop the share and hand back to Kate, who can field any questions that have come in.
Thank you so much, Michael. One of the strange things I've discovered about these talks is that no one gives you a round of applause, so you can't hear it.
I'm just assuming that it's just dead silence.
And we do have some questions in the chat, so thank you very much. So we'll start off with Sarah, who's asking, how do you deal with the issues of people not knowing what they want to see in a report or visualization? Is there a process for gathering requirements for a report or dashboard, which makes this process easier?
Yes. So we're generally approached by two types of people: the people that know what they want and the people that don't know what they want. They know what they want to say, but they don't know what the outcome is. Now, it's almost easier with the people that don't know what they want, because the first stage of our process is to usually sit in a room, but now, get on a call like this and to really thrash out what are the objectives, who are you trying to talk to, what is it you're trying to say, what do you want them to take away from it? And generally those conversations lead to some kind of outcome. So it might be a dashboard, it might be a report, it varies. But the important thing first is to clarify what it is that you're trying to say and who you're saying it to before you worry about what the output is. Now, the people that come to us and say, I definitely need an interactive report, we still go through the same process, because it's important to challenge those assumptions, to basically push back and say, well, explain to me why it is that you need that. Let's look at the audience. Let's look at what you're saying. Is an interactive report, say, the best way to do it? And by exploring those options from our different viewpoints, so them as the person with all the knowledge, us asking the stupid questions, it often teases out some ideas that maybe wouldn't have come along if one person with a fixed mindset had just plowed on through it.
Yeah, that's great. So the next question is from Ina, asking if you'd be able to provide some links to some of the research that you've talked about.
Yes.
What's the best way for us to do that?
I will, what is the best way to do that? I can scurry around at the, well, I could do it now, but that's not going to be very good.
Or we could, when we send feedback forms to people, maybe we could put some links in that email as well. That if you could forward us that, we could do it like that. Maybe.
Something.
Yeah, Patty.
We are gonna provide links in our Data Week webpage to our presentations. So if you can send us the links, Michael, we can add that to the page for this presentation.
Yes, I certainly will, because it's important to read more about them, but it's very easy to kind of, like I said, when I was doing my research for this, the internet is awash with statements around, you know, especially driven by marketing companies and social media companies around, you know, the power of visual communication and why infographics are so good. And it's important to make sure that we're basing decisions that we make, often that involve spending a lot of time or spending a little bit of money on kind of important, like, evidence, basically, that we're using this as a way of sharing this important information and not just going, well, they said it's a good idea, so I'm going to do it. So yeah, I'll absolutely share those links and we can get them out to everyone afterwards.
That'd be great. So we've got a question from Paul saying, do you think your clients have a very good sense of who their audience are when you first speak to them? Or is this something you think there's some specific questions that they need to go away and research in detail?
Well, again, it's a very similar situation where some assume that they know everything and some are willing to accept that they don't. And often it's a harder journey with the ones that assume they know everything, because you almost have to go in and unpick it and say, okay, well, you say that this is what it is. Show us the evidence. Show us what makes you say that. And often it's assumptions, and often those assumptions are quite out of date. One of the things that I always find fascinating is that when we have meetings with our clients, we will sit in a room with them and someone will say something about what their kind of mission as an organization is, or who their audience are. And someone else in the room goes, oh, I didn't realize that. I thought it was something different. And these can be people that are very high up in the company. So often these meetings are followed by a period of self-reflection where they say, okay, can you just give us a bit of time to go away and think about it? So the important thing for us is that these workshops that we have at the start aren't a case of saying, can you just tell us what you want us to do? It's making sure that the people that are engaging with us really understand what it is that they want to communicate, and that then we can understand it, because we can't communicate something if we don't understand it. How can we possibly expect other people to understand it if we don't understand it ourselves? So we have to ask those tough questions, and it does often lead to that period of kind of, we have to go away and think about this. But that's a really important process. And that's why you often end up with people that say, I want a report, and it ends up being something quite different, because when they really reflect on who they're talking to and what they need, it can often be something a bit different. Oh, by the way, I'm just going to post I said I would, I'm putting my LinkedIn, no, I'm not. I'm going to put my LinkedIn thing in the chat.
That'd be great. While you're doing that, you can multitask. Maddie asks, I found there to be a barrier in producing great data viz if you're not a pro at coding. What's the best language to start with?
So I'm going to hold my hands up here. I know nothing about coding. Coding to me is another world where it's just a fascinating thing that the people that do it are wizards and I can't do it at all. What I bring is creative thinking and problem solving, and looking at data and complex information from that different mindset of how you communicate. Now, when it comes to recommending coders and programs and things like that, I I would say reach out to the community, put it in the chat. If anyone's got suggestions in the chat, share them. Say, you should talk to this person, they're great, or you should use this program because it's got a month free trial and you can explore and it's really intuitive. I'm not going to pretend that I'm some expert at something that I'm not, but what I would say is I really value when there's something that I don't know how to do. I find it much easier to engage with someone that does know how to do it so that I can go on that journey with them. And rather than just saying, oh, well, I'm either not going to do it because I can't do it, or I'm going to bury myself in tutorials for the next year and do something that comes out the other end that's rather mediocre anyway. It's amazing to me how much people want to collaborate. So when we get data that involves either coding or some kind of wizardry that just is beyond me as an individual, we bring in the people to Luna9, or we work in partnership with other people that have those skills. And what happens there is that brilliant exchange of knowledge where we're showing them how we want to present the data from a design point of view, and they're showing us how they want to build it and how they want to craft it. And that together is a really powerful thing. I think it's when people start operating just in their little silos that it can sometimes become a bit samey. So I would encourage you to reach out to your reach out to each other. I mean, I can already see in the chat that there's some really great suggestions here. So yeah,
Orange 3 and Python and R. So I was going to say start with Python and R.
Yeah, Python is the one that like comes up most in our work, but yeah, I'm like I say, there are people far more qualified than me to give good advice on that. So connect with each other, talk to each other, link in with each other, or do whatever you need to do to make sure that people are willing to give up their time. I mean, people enjoy sharing information. So if you find someone that's passionate about Python, they'll probably give you some pointers to read this book, go on this tutorial, and you're up and away. But doing that on your own is a bit of a kind of lonely and non-collaborative way to do it. So I'd say crack on.
James is asking, do you have a preferred visual medium for people trying to explore the data, i.e. not just giving them an outcome, but letting them explore instead?
So the exploring, what we generally do, so we're more focused on the storytelling aspect of the data. So rather than saying that, give us all your data and we're going to show it back to you and let's explore it, what we want to do is people that have got data to share, we're more interested in the messages that they want that data to support. So it's not just a case of, people don't come to us generally with kind of, I've got all this data and I just have no idea what to do with it. They generally know what it is they want to do, and then they've got this strange data set, which happens a lot now, especially in business, where people have this data, they don't really know what to do with it. And so you're seeing an increasing amount of people going, well, actually, if you repackage it like this and take this message out, you can find out some really interesting stuff. And that's the key now, because there's so much data flying around. The key is to tease out the bits that matter and the bits that are actually not really very helpful. And a lot of that journey for us is about making people really focus in on specific things rather than going, well, you've got this enormous data set, how can we share it? So we talked before about dashboards. Dashboards are great, apart from the fact that it can end up being a real assault on the senses when you see, when you see everything. So what it is saying, if someone's looking at a dashboard and you show them 32 different little data sets, is that useful? Probably not. So how can you share 5 or 6 that mean that they really take something away from it? That's something that we have a much greater role in rather than drilling down into the data itself. But again, that's where if the data needed that level of exploration and picking apart, it's again where we bring in specialists to work with us and form that kind of collaborative team that we can go back to our clients and say, right, well, we've assembled our dream team of people that need to work on this specific job. Let's see where it goes.
Lots of chat going on about courses, Python courses, and I'm aware that the sessions that we put on for Data Week, a lot of them were booked out really quickly, but we're constantly trying to find new opportunities to put those on and working with ACRC as well. So if you're on our mailing lists out there, you'll get early warning of some of those opportunities coming up.
I finally got the LinkedIn link in there at last.
Thank you, brilliant. I had one last quick question before we go, which is a lot of the images that you've kind of infographics that you've presented yourself today have been static, and I was wondering what your view is on animated infographics or VR in this space.
Okay, so this talk was an exercise, believe it or not, this was a real exercise in self-restraint, because I'm a former animator. I used to work at Aardman on Wallace and Gromit and stuff, and so my natural way of wanting to share information is moving visuals. I love doing animations. Explainer videos are incredibly powerful. The idea of AR and VR, Owen, who I founded Luna9 with, we absolutely love it. We have intentionally gone out and met some other companies, startups in Bristol that work in AR and VR to see how we can combine data viz with what they do. And that's a great example of two skills coming together, that we take the best of what they do with the best of what we do. And we've been messing around with some really exciting stuff. We're kind of looking through iPads at data sets that you can walk around. And that if it provides value and it's not just a gimmick, that can be an incredibly useful way of bringing information to life. I would have loved to have filled my talk with visuals. When I was writing things about the power of visual communication, every time I was writing, I was thinking, why am I not visualizing this? This is so kind of counterintuitive. But there was a limit to kind of my late nights. But
hold that thought. I think there's a whole other seminar that we could run on that.
But to summarize, I think that the more avenues that we have to help data to communicate these complex ideas, whether it's data, whether it's a theory, whether it's an idea, the more that we can find ways to really engage people and get them to buy into what we're saying, the better. And so that's why as an agency, we don't like to talk about the products that we offer. We talk about the service that we provide in terms of kind of facilitating that communication, because it might end up being that we do some environmental design and it's plasterable over a building, or it might be that it's AR, or it might be that it's a website, or it might be that it's printed. But if we go in with a set idea of what the end deliverable is, it determines the way that you communicate. You start making decisions based on the outcome rather than the information. So it's a very exciting area that you're talking about, that at any opportunity we're looking to explore more, because the more we can lift things off a page, make them digital, make them interactive, the better, because it just increases that level of engagement. And also you can learn a lot more from the analytics as well.
Well, I think that sounds like a great place to end. Positive note. It just remains for me to say thank you, Michael, for a great talk. Thank you to everybody who came. We had a huge number of people online and the chat was really active, which I think is testimony to how much your talk has been appreciated. Thank you very much to our helpers behind the scenes, who today were Patty and Liz and Lily. I said at the beginning, but I'll say again, we will be sending you a feedback form, so do tell us what you think about the content, what you'd like in future, what's good about this kind of way of working, what's challenging for you. That'd be really helpful to us. So it just remains for me to say thank you, everybody. Stay well, stay safe, and we hope to see you face to face at some point very soon. Thanks, Michael, very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.